Hi, and welcome to episode 12 of My Words, Our Journey. I'm Monty. Thank you for returning to see what happens next in our story. We're nearing the end, so let's continue with chapter 42. 6 names remained on the half sheet of yellow legal paper when Myles was finished. The 3 names at the top of the list were his primary targets, and the next 3 were his backups. Myles had taken his original list of potential targets and narrowed it down to 20 rather quickly. Then he revisited his previous chats and notes, having never imagined how the detailed information would ultimately influence who would be the last 3 to die at his hand. Without these notes, Myles would have been less confident in his selections. Number 1 on his list was an older predator who went by the name of Still Young to Play 62. Myles had been in communication with this particular predator on and off for quite some time. Over the course of their first 2 chats, Still Young to Play 62 had made it clear he was not new to the arena of adult child love. He had wasted no time with small talk, but rather his intentions were made clear from the start. Myles had been shocked and disgusted when the pervert sent him pictures of himself. Even though he had commented more than once how wrong others perceived his lifestyle to be, this man seemed to have no fear. They just don't understand, he had explained. This was also the reason he gave for requesting that their conversations and plans to meet stayed just between us. Myles remembered that Still Young to Play 62 was the only freak he had conversed with who had caused him to make a mad dash to the toilet when they were done, where he threw up. And then, without moving away from the stench of the bowl or lifting himself from the cold tile floor on which he knelt, he had cried. Not because of the man's disgusting words or pictures. Rather, Myles cried over his knowledge of what this man did for a living. Still Young to Play 62 was the director of the state's second largest after-school program for children. His was the first name Myles had written on his list of people he wanted to eliminate, and Myles had never moved the name from the number 1 spot on his list. Myles was conflicted by the next name on the list, a young man who used the online moniker BFFL Hank. The BFL stood for Best Friend for Life. As far as Myles was concerned, Hank was not as dangerous only because he was much younger, more subtle and tactful, and seemingly not as experienced in the game of seduction. Then again, Myles argued with himself, those qualities make him potentially more dangerous, don't they? This character preyed on both young boys and girls, and had spoken to Myles on 7 occasions when Myles had pretended to be one or the other. He was smooth and also very confident. On their 3rd or 4th call, he told Myles that he was studying law enforcement with aspirations of becoming a detective. Myles' last primary target was a man who used the handle Shy Guy. This man did not work with children and claimed he had never done more than have cyber sex with a minor. He had been polite and courteous to Myles each time they had communicated and seemed to be shy in every way. However, Myles had been horrified when Shy Guy revealed that he and his wife had adopted several small children and that each year they hosted 3 foreign exchange students in their home. The thought of this man surrounding himself with children under the guise of love and hospitality infuriated Myles. He chose these 3 alternatives for the same reason, and although each man on Myles' original list had shown themselves to be child predators and therefore deserving of death, Myles knew he would run out of time before he could get to all of them. Chapter 43. A few of her coworkers had given Amy a heads up that the big boss was planning on one of his pop-ins today. Amy was extremely grateful for the information, as it allowed her to mentally prepare herself for her next encounter with him, or possibly avoid him altogether if she got lucky. He had a way of making her madder than a cornered snake, while at the same time making her feel guilty and apologetic about things that did not involve her. Today would be no different. She had been able to avoid him until after lunch, but when she came back to work, she found him sitting in her chair with his feet propped up on her desk. Upon seeing her, he wasted no time on pleasantries and started right in with criticism. Despite the smile she forced on her face, Amy was not sure if she was more upset with his threats regarding her job or the way he tried to place the weight of the entire paper on her shoulders. Either way, she was the cornered snake. She fought back the words that were raging in her head. Give me 2 weeks, and you'll be kissing my butt for me to stay at this ragtag piece of. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, the pilot announced that passengers could now turn on their small electronic devices. Sean immediately checked in with Jill to let her know he had landed safely at Bristol Regional Airport. Then he noticed he had a text. Kenny Costco letting him know that he and Leonard would be waiting for him at the bar in the terminal. Despite his urge to kiss the ground after the short flight, Sean was on cloud nine. He was minutes away from meeting the two men who had asked for his help. While on the plane, he had worked through, in his head, how he'd properly greet them. He had learned the hard way on his first venture outside the office exactly how to turn people off, and he wanted to make sure he was never that foolish again. The case had involved a gang of car thieves and a theft that went terribly wrong, leaving an entire family dead. After the murders, the gang went deep undercover, dodging the authorities' radar until Sean linked crimes 2 counties over to the gang. However, when he was officially brought on the case, his bravado turned everyone away from him. It turned out that folks don't care much for a young guy who thought he could act like Kojak. Once the case was solved, he never heard a word from anyone. No thank you, we'll keep in touch, or even screw you. Nada. Walking into the airport tavern, Sean spotted Kenny and Leonard right away. He knew it was them. They stood as soon as they made eye contact with him and waited for Sean to approach. "Hi, I'm Sean Trammell. It's an honor to finally meet you both," he said as he shook hands with both men. He thought much better than, "Hi, I'm Sean Trammell, and I'm here to solve your case," he thought to himself. It was true. With experience comes knowledge. Chapter 44. Myles had hired a handyman who spent the morning at the apartment building, picking up trash, trimming the hedges, and applying fresh paint to each of the 3 front doors. He had also remounted the mailboxes to their wooden posts and applied an extra coat of white paint to each one. Myles was extremely pleased by what he saw when he drove by later in the day. The workman obviously had an eye for detail. On the front stoop of each apartment was a small potted flowering plant, obviously placed there in response to Myles's request that he make the place look homey. This guy was definitely worth the extra money. Without his disguise on, Myles barely slowed down as he checked things out and proceeded to the small library 2 towns to the south. He knew it had a limited selection and was cluttered and disorganized, not what most look for in a library, but it had the one thing he needed, a computer where he could get online with privacy and make his move on all 3 targets. With the installation of the carpet scheduled in just a few days, Myles knew he had to use his time efficiently. It had been a while since he had been in defender mode, and he was getting excited, not about the killings or the physical and emotional toll they'd take on him, but rather the excitement about reaching the end of his mission. Furthermore, he realized that he was very much looking forward to meeting the woman who would write his story, and he had briefly entertained the fantasy of the 2 of them being together. However, he was fully aware that there would be no happy ending for him. Myles pulled into the library parking lot where only one other car was parked. Once inside the building, he didn't immediately see anyone. Then from the back came a fragile-looking woman with arms loaded down with books. He tried to help her with her task, but she refused the help. A proud woman, just like his mother, he thought. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he went to work. It was like he had never left. He wondered what these predators did for a living. When did they find the time to be on the internet so much? They were like sharks swimming through the dark and murky waters, waiting. Once his dates were set, he would call Amy and give her a taste of what to expect from him. Keep her wanting more. Chapter 45. Amy received his call around 4:30 in the afternoon on her office phone the day before. His speech had been pointed, his words chosen carefully. She could tell that he was reaching out for someone he could trust and felt that she was that someone. Lucky for her, she thought. On a scratch pad, she wrote the information he gave, the name of the restaurant, the time to meet, and the name the reservation would be under. Amy contemplated her options as she aimlessly circled the information in a slow motion with her red pen over and over. It was a pointless activity, but it gave her time to think about not going, calling the authorities, what to do, what would be the right thing to do. Amy was relieved that the restaurant was one that she had been to numerous times. The reservation was for 8 o'clock, but she planned to arrive at 7:30. If the guy did not show, She would ask one of the male employees to escort her to her car. That was the only detail she had worked out. She realized the rest of the evening would be out of her control, so she let her mind wander to thoughts of the day and the next year when her book would be released. She decided that this was either going to be her big break or would be the first of a series of events that would cause her to flee to Mexico, or possibly worse. On the ride from the airport to the hotel, the guys talked about anything and everything except the case. Sean had anticipated going straight to the precinct headquarters, but Kenny and Leonard insisted on letting him put his stuff away and making sure he was set in his accommodations. They waited in the lobby while he checked into his room and dropped off his luggage. When Sean returned to the lobby, he found that they had taken care of his room charges and left a credit card for any other charges that may come up. Sean always felt awkward about bringing up such details and wondered how that would play out. He was glad it was taken care of. Once back on the road, the mood among the men changed. The getting to know you phase was behind them, and it was time to get serious about the case. The ride from the hotel to the precinct was a nonstop round of questions and answers, and Sean was relieved by Kenny and Leonard's shift in gears. Upon first meeting them, he had questioned whether or not they were serious about the case, and if this trip down to the remote end of the state would be a waste of his time. But once he was escorted into his new workroom, his doubt vanished. He was impressed by the room with its charts, maps, state-of-the-art equipment, and the stuff Sean lived for. He did not hesitate to share his enthusiasm with his hosts. Once home from work, Amy showered, changed, and ate a light snack while watching the Food Network. She was not hungry, and she had no interest in what was on TV. She was simply doing her best to keep herself occupied and not look at the clock every 2 minutes. But she had no luck distracting herself from her thoughts. The man had been so calm as he explained what he was going to do and what he expected from her when they met. At the time, all she could think about was how it would affect her. Now she opened herself up to the big picture. 3 men were going to lose their lives tonight. Could she live with that? Her phone conversation with the stranger only reiterated what she already knew. His name and whereabouts were a mystery. She had no information whatsoever about the murders that were going to take place, and she had no real proof the man even was who he claimed to be. Even if she did call the police and they believed her, it'd be too late, wouldn't it? She could have the police waiting at the restaurant, but it'd be too late for the dead men, right? Amy stared at her face in the mirror, unable to look away from her own eyes, with thoughts of where her life had taken her, from helping Daddy work on his old tractor to meeting a mass murderer for dinner and drinks. Chapter 46. The lion stalks its target. The eagle uses its keen eye to swoop down upon its victim, and the spider waits for its prey to enter its web. Myles was the spider. He was going back to the strategy that had worked for him in the past. Let them come to him. All 3 predators had seemed eager to meet him. Rather, the adolescent he pretended to be online, and he had no problems getting them all to commit to meeting today. If Myles only now had been embarking on his mission, he would have been surprised at how easy it was to get 3 grown men to drop everything for a date with a child. But not now, not after coming to grips with this sad truth. They were sharks lurking in the murky waters. Each was leery with the recent murders in the news, but not enough to keep them from their desires. Myles used his track phone to make the arrangements with the men through text messages and then packed all that he would need into his well-used duffel bag. As he pulled out of his driveway for the last time, he did not look back, not even a quick glance in the rearview mirror. Today he'd be finishing the race, and there was no time for looking back. Instead, Myles was thinking ahead to dinner, his plan to turn himself in with dignity, and the story Amy would write. He hoped it would make the public understand why he did what he did. Myles drove along with the windows down and the music playing low on his car stereo. His mind, unable to maintain a train of thought, jumped from one notion to the next. He was split down the middle. Part of him wanted this day to be over. The other part wanted to hang on to the excitement he felt about finally sitting down with Amy. On his way to the apartment building, Myles had several errands to run. He thought it was mildly humorous that a serial killer had to take care of such mundane chores before committing 3 more murders, but it was just not his style to leave things unattended. So he stopped by the post office to send off 2 bills that were soon to be due. Then he stopped by work entering through the back door to avoid any unwelcome confrontations, to sign off on a home delivery that he had forgotten to do that morning. These particular customers were very nice, and he wanted to make sure they got their beige carpet for their new remodel family room. Finally, he stopped by the bank and transferred $300 from his savings to his checking to cover the bills he had mailed. Once at the apartments, Myles focused on the task at hand. He had planned for his victims to arrive 2 hours apart, and although he'd prefer to have the shortened time span between arrivals, experience had taught him these men could be as much as an hour early, or they could pass back and forth in front of the place for 30 minutes and be late, or any other number of things could mess up his plans. The only thing he knew for sure was that these men were sick to death, and they would come. The slamming of a car door just outside apartment 1 startled Myles. A moment later, the apartment door opened, much sooner than he anticipated. The creep must have run up the walkway, he thought. Myles kicked the door closed behind the man and then swung the bat with a quick and forceful motion, hitting his victim in the gut. If he had been at the ball field, it would have definitely been a home run. The man known online as BFFL Hank lay before him, clutching his midsection with both arms as he rocked back and forth on the dirty floor. Taking another man's life had not been easy for him, but looking at this scared kid squirming around like a 7-year-old who had just fallen off his bike and banged himself up was difficult. He would have walked away right then and there if it had been up to him, but it was not up to him. He had been called by higher powers for this important mission. Myles knelt down and clumsily secured the predator's wrist behind his back with duct tape and retrieved his wallet, where he found the young man's student ID, several credit cards, a few 20s, and a folded piece of paper with a phone number scrawled on it, which he thought looked familiar, most likely one of the numbers for the track phones he had discarded only a few hours earlier. He noticed a laptop computer, a bottle of Boone's Farm, and a small MP3 player strewn on the floor. The wine and the MP3 player were gifts Myles had asked for online. Sammy Tillman was too afraid to speak, and Myles could respect that, but he wanted to know what had been the cause of his downfall and how he explained his behavior. "Make me understand," he said firmly. He was in no mood to waste time, and he could read in his victim's eyes that he had no intention of talking. Myles believed that if this situation had been reversed, he would have been trying to communicate with his attacker, if only to prolong the inevitable so he could plan a possible escape. Time was up for both of them, perhaps. Without warning, Myles struck the man in the head with 2 powerful blows of the bat. The first had caused the predator to black out, and the second ended his young and unfulfilling life. Myles quickly removed Sam Tillman's clothes, stashed them in his duffel bag along with his laptop and the other gifts, and left his calling card in the man's gaping mouth. Chapter 47. Nothing was taking as long as Myles had planned, and the temperature in the building continued to rise. He was forced to crack open one window in the apartment. Then he backed himself up against the front door of the apartment number 2, allowing himself to slide down until he was sitting on the floor. Time was not working in his favor. The stillness, heat, and another one of his blinding headaches were making it nearly impossible for Myles to keep his eyes open until he heard the voices. Then he was quickly on his feet. He was afraid he had been too confident in his plan. Was someone coming to see the apartment? Would they go to the first apartment first and find the body? Suddenly, the questions running through his mind stopped. Myles recognized there were 2 voices, an adult and a child. Forcing himself to tune out his own pounding heartbeat, he focused on the conversation coming in through the window. His knees buckled momentarily as he heard the child's words. "So, Uncle Steve, if I hang out with you here and don't tell Mom and Dad, you'll take me for pizza and ice cream after?" All that mattered to him was that this vile beast had brought a child into his twisted scenario. Tears welled up in his eyes, and it trickled down his cheek. The man walked through the door before Myles realized what was happening, and now he was face to face with the man he knew as Shy Guy. Next to the apprehensive-looking predator stood a bushy-haired boy who could not have been more than 6 or 7 years old. He was wearing a blue Transformers t-shirt and holding a small bag of rocks in his pudgy hand. His gaze was fixed on the baseball bat in Myles' grip. For the child's sake, Myles lowered the bat and improvised. "Hello, sir. You must be here to see the apartment," he said with no clear direction. The man stood with his mouth open. He looked as confused as Myles felt. The youngster stared up at his uncle, and Myles fought back the urge to vomit. "Son, Why don't you go check out the backyard for a minute? He suggested in a voice so calm he surprised himself. I think you'll like it. Myles turned to Shy Guy, who seemed to be trying to figure out what the crazed man with the bat had in mind for him, probably wondering if he should let the kid walk away or use him as leverage. Myles could see no concern for the boy's safety in this man's eyes, only a cornered animal weighing his options. We only have a moment. The yard's not that big, Myles said. The kid just saved your life today. Myles was visibly shaking, not to the point he felt he might shake the bat right out of his grip. I wasn't going to do anything, the frightened man pleaded. I was just curious and bored. Is that the cards and beer? Myles asked as both men looked down at the brown bag held low in the man's left hand. Running like children do, the boy came crashing back into the small room, almost gliding across the floor. The backyard is small, but can you get a puppy? He asked with high hopes. I'll help you take care of it, I promise. With his nerves coming under control, Myles tousled the child's hair and told him his uncle was going to take him for pizza and ice cream, like he'd promised, and he'd probably even stop by the shelter and let him pick out that puppy today so he could go ahead and take it home. Instead of speaking, Shy Guy only gave a small, almost undetectable nod, and with his hand over his nephew's shoulder, guided the child towards the door. As he watched the man buckle the youth into the back seat, he wondered if the man would change, or could he change? He wanted to be optimistic. Finally, Myles' body revolted against what he had experienced in this building today, heaving deep and forcefully over and over under the floor. When the nausea subsided, Myles turned away from the disturbing mess he had created and kicked the duffel, lying on the floor. Leaning over, he could feel the pull of the lower back muscles and reached a decision. That's it, enough. This mission is over. His 3 had been cut down to 1, and he knew that the young man's face would stay with him for a long while. He realized that the powers that be had broken him. Nevertheless, a smile crept over his face. He could only imagine the reaction Shy Guy would have when he first realized he had been face to face with the defender of children. One thing for sure, it'd be hard for him to tell anyone this story. Myles checked his watch and saw that he still had about 40 minutes before Still Young to Play 62 was supposed to arrive. Would anyone ever understand the emotional and physical strain he had endured on this mission? Or would they just think he was a cold-blooded killer? At this particular moment, he did not care. He just wanted to leave. The overall toll had been more powerful than the need to remove one more predator, even one as bad as Still Young to Play 62. As he walked down the street towards his G6, he noticed a few kids huddled around a black Lincoln Town Car that was parked at the curb, its engine running. Myles didn't give the scene much thought, and he continued on his way for a few more paces before realizing that something just wasn't right. Then he knew that he was not done for the day, because the plate on the front of the automobile read SY2PLY. Myles could tell that the old man was too occupied with his new young friends to have noticed him walking by. So he turned his heel and headed back to door number 3. He sprung up the steps to the front of the stoop and entered the 3rd apartment, duffel bag swinging at his side. Amy would have quite the story to tell. Let's stop there. Next time, we'll begin with Chapter 48 and Apartment Number 3. Thank you and have a great day.